This is, now can you hear me? Okay. This is why we start early. So we can, yeah, do all the things that I'm supposed to be doing. So I've been over here chatting to everybody, but no one knew. No one knew. This is why we start early. So we can, yeah, do all the things that I'm supposed to. Oh, well, it turned out I didn't have the microphone turned on, so it was my fault. It's my mistake. I have a little checklist of everything I'm supposed to do before this, but today I did not look at it. So, yeah. Anyway, I get by with a little help from my friends. So thank you for letting me know you couldn't hear me. I do not like the orientation of my setup. So I'm going to see what happens when I do this. So, all right, well, we'll see how that works. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, and we have Frederick from Sweden. Nice to see you here. Gitte, also from Stockholm. We have someone from Rochester. Who else? Share where you're from. From Uppsala. I listen to medieval history in the evening, and Uppsala came up as an important area in Sweden in medieval times. So I was just reading about Uppsala yesterday or last night. So, and it's a beautiful town. I've been there. And someone's joining from India and Wichita, closer to home. So what time is it in India? It must be late for you guys. Rafael from Mexico, Mindy from Minneapolis. Hi, Mindy. I think, Mindy, you had a birthday recently. Happy birthday. And I saw your new toy on Facebook. So Mindy is a scientist, and her new toy looks to be a telescope. So that was pretty exciting. So it's not that late in India. It's 8:30. Okay. All right. Amsterdam, Philadelphia, Colorado. Okay. So we've got lots of people from lots of interesting places. So I'm going to give one more minute for people to come in, since even though we don't have to, if we're working remotely, we don't have to physically move from meeting to meeting. People still need a break between meetings. Still need a break. So I'm going to give it one more minute, and then I'm going to launch. Okay, we have another person from Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas. Yeah, I always think it's super fun to hear where people are from. And you know me, I'm from northern Minnesota, a little town called Duluth. I lived most of my adult life in Minneapolis, but I moved up here because my husband thought Minneapolis was too hot, which is sort of an astonishing thing if you've ever been to Minnesota. But Minneapolis does get hot in the summer. It does get quite hot. And it is finally spring here, which means we go from a day where it's 40 degrees to a day where it's 80 degrees and then to 50. So it's kind of like, you know, very variable weather patterns in the spring here. Yeah, so if you want to chat, choose panelists and attendees, not just panelists, because I'm the only panelist, and if you choose panelist, I'm the only one who gets to see. So thanks. That's Vim. let me know that. So California, Michael, I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you? Okay, let's see if we can get things going here. I have to move something around on my screen. Okay, so for those of you who haven't been to one of these webinars before, these are quite informal. They are entirely unscripted. So I'm going to say, I have things prepared, but there's an opportunity to respond to what people say in the chat. So I'll be glancing over at that from time to time. So I will share some content and some ideas, this time related to expanding your influence. And then we will open it up to questions. So when we get to the question period, I'm going to ask you to use the Q&A function so that I can keep track of the questions, because it helps me know what people are interested in and what I might want to cover in a future webinar. So this is the second in the spring series of webinars. We have one more coming up in the spring series, and that is going to be on getting unstuck, because people get stuck sometimes. And then I'll launch into the summer series. I have not landed on the topics for the summer, so if there's something you would like me to cover, I will certainly consider it. Otherwise, I'll choose what seems to be relevant based on what I'm hearing people talking about and the struggles I'm seeing people have. So that's the deal. It's informal. We will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and let's go. So we're talking about influence today, expanding your influence. So how many of you, show me in the chat, feel like you are pretty influential where you work? How many people feel like they have influence? Let's see in the chat. Yeah, okay, so a lot of people do feel like they have influence, but there are some limits. It depends on the topic. Yeah, department level influence. Yeah, so I want to make a distinction between influence and persuasion. It's like a lot of people I talk to feel like if they're trying to get someone to try something new, or they're trying to make a change in their organization, they have to talk them into it. And that often doesn't work, right? There are limits to persuasion. And persuasion means that you're trying to change someone's mind via logic and argument. However, influence can be a lot more subtle, and there's a lot more ways to do it. And you don't have to worry about trying to, have an argument with somebody and talk them into something, which, if you lose the argument, you've kind of lost the game. If you win the argument, you may have someone feeling resentful or rolled over. And if it's a draw, well, then you're not making any progress. So there's real limits to that, to trying to talk someone into something. So think about influence. And expanding your influence. So I define influence as the capacity or power of causing an effect through indirect and intangible ways. So it's not that thing about persuasion. It's not, a tit for tat sort of thing where I give you something and you give me something tangible back. It's very often just the way we treat people creates influence. I mean, if you think about how you interact with your friends and family, you do favors for people, not with an expectation of getting something in return, but it does create a sense of reciprocity. And people will often do something for you or be inclined to be, favorable about what you're working on because you've done something nice for them. So influence is just a social thing we do, right? And we can't avoid influencing people on some level. You know, all of our actions and interactions have the potential to change the way people regard us, make them feel more favorable to us or less favorable to us. So it's going on all the time. It's a natural process. When it comes to organizations, I think it helps to be a little more intentional, particularly if you need the support of other people to accomplish what it is you're hoping to accomplish. So that's most of us, right? Most of us need the help of other people or the support of other people in our organizations to get things done. So, I don't equate influence with politics. Politics is also a social process, and many people associate it with competing for power. And what I see in many organizations is that when people don't have a clear vision and they don't have a clear idea about what problems they're solving for customers, the default is to go into politics, which is around advancing your own personal interest, often at the expense of organizational interests. So I don't equate the two of them. I think influence is something that happens in the service of accomplishing organizational goals. So what is involved? I think there are really two keys to influence. Mutual purpose, meaning that you both are engaged in some aspect of the goal together. It might not be the whole thing, but there might be some aspects that will be beneficial to both parties. So finding mutual purpose is super important. And that requires being able to understand where another person is coming from, right? The other part of it is reciprocity. So if you always ask for favors and never give favors, that breaks reciprocity. If you give favors or you help people out and they never return that, that also breaks reciprocity. And reciprocity is a really strong human social need. So I remember a conversation with one of my old roommates a billion years ago where she did a lot of nice things for her boyfriend. And when she asked for something in return, he said no, which everyone has a right to say no. But she said, but I do all these nice things for you. And he said, yeah, but I never asked for them. So that was a breach in reciprocity. And it led to kind of a big fight, but they worked it out. They worked out what she meant by reciprocity and what he meant by it. And they're still married. So it's got to be, well, they got married in about 80, maybe 1990. So it's been a long time. So they figured it out, but it's a very, very strong social need, this idea of reciprocity. And in order to have reciprocity, you have relationship and exchange, right? So you have to have a relationship. And I think relationships are really important when we think about influencing people. I tend to look at when I'm trying to influence a change in an organization, who is going to be affected by this? Whose support do I need? Who are the stakeholders in it? And I look at what are my relationships like with those people. Now, this may sound a little utilitarian, and it depends, I think, to a large extent on your motives, right? If your motive is to accomplish organizational goals and you still have a genuine interest in that person, that doesn't bother me so much. If you're just trying to get something from someone without considering their needs and without actually having some genuine interest in them, then it does feel utilitarian. But I tend to look at, what are the relationships I need to build? Now, I don't need to become best friends with people, but I do need to have some understanding of where they're coming from and what's important to them in their role. And we'll talk about that more in a little later. The other thing is exchange, right? Something to offer. Now, those of you who said you have influence, I'm curious where you feel like your influence comes from. So if you could put it in the chat, where do you think your influence comes from? And remember, all panelists and all attendees, where do you think your influence comes from? So being trusted, having credibility. Yeah. Yep. Credibility, experience, subject matter expertise, having rapport, that personal relationship, trust and confidence, credibility. Yeah, all of these things tend to give you influence. And that, that is super useful. Like, if you have no credibility and people don't trust you, you're unlikely to be able to influence them or to gain their support for whatever change you're working on. Yeah, so influence is generated by the people around you, granted by the people around you. Yeah, genuinely being yourself and genuinely caring, right? That is something that it makes people feel more favorable to you. So they're more likely to go along with you. So empathy, that's another one that someone has mentioned. Yeah, admitting you're wrong when you're not sure, that actually builds credibility in many organizations. So, yeah. So there's a lot of research on influence, and in the idea of exchange, sometimes they use the term currencies because that's very much associated with exchange. So here's kind of a partial list of some of the things that can be exchanged, that not all of these came up with the list, right? So involvement in a project or an effort that's exciting or new or provides a learning opportunity can be a form of exchange. Hey, will you work with me on this project? I think it's going to be an opportunity to really gain some significant insights about, whatever it is, and practice these new things. And, so that sort of thing is a currency, which you may or may not have. So when you hear that, does that seem like something that you might have access to? If you're coaching a team, maybe you do. If you are trying a pilot to try a new idea in your organization, you may be able to use that. Here's an opportunity to participate in this pilot where we're going to be testing these ideas that could be super important to our company. Yeah. So anyone feel like they can use that form of exchange? Anyone feel like that is something they might have? Yeah. Okay. So this is another way you get influence. Tangible resources. So if you're a manager and you control a budget, you may be able to contribute some actual budget to an effort. That's a form of exchange. In I'll support your project with this budget, or perhaps you have some equipment that you're not using that you could contribute to another project. That will build goodwill. I mean, when I was a dev manager, I had some machines I wasn't using, and I, let another manager use them for a project, and that built up goodwill, which made it more likely that that other manager would support me at some future time. Sometimes you can assign people, right? Those aren't resources, those are people, to a project, which again builds up some goodwill and is likely to be reciprocated. Any kind of assistance it can be an exchange. Introductions. I introduce people to people all the time. I hear someone saying, I'm dealing with this issue and going on and on about something they're having that maybe I don't have the answer to. And I say, well, let me introduce you to so-and-so, and because he really has a lot of expertise in that area, or she has worked with this problem many times and may have some ideas for you. Or I'm not really the right person to handle this particular issue, but really you should talk to. So I make those sorts of introductions all the time. Costs me nothing. It helps out the person I'm making the introduction to, and it helps out the person I've introduced in many cases. And it comes back, right? Information. If you come across articles or something that are useful to people and you share it, that builds up goodwill. It contributes to your expertise, and it also says, you're a helpful person. So information is one of those things that is much more valuable when it's shared than when it's hoarded. I mean, some people try to hoard information to gain influence, but I think that almost always backfires. So sharing information, another great thing. Listening to people, you would be surprised how little people feel that they are actually listened to. So the gift of truly listening to someone creates an enormous amount of goodwill. If you're known as a good listener, people are going to be positively inclined to you. Understanding, comfort, gratitude, recognition, which can be informal, or it can be something that, oh dear, that was interesting. I didn't mean that to happen. That a manager has some control over. It can be formal or informal recognition. It can be, telling the boss's boss how well you've done something and how you've contributed, which can contribute to visibility. So all of these things are things that we may be able to do in our day-to-day work lives because we're decent, helpful, nice people that will come back to us in terms of influence at a future point, because someone might be willing to help us out because we help them out. So that doesn't sound manipulative to me, right? I think it's manipulative when people don't tell the whole deal about what's going on, or they try to persuade someone to do something that's against their best interest. But just helping people out is what we do in our normal day-to-day thing. So looking at the chat, looking like other people does convey some sorts of influence. That is certainly true. Listening has really helped. Yeah, listening has really helped. Gitta says it's gotten her far. Yeah, taking time for people. All of these things that we just do because we are decent humans. It builds up a reservoir of goodwill that means people are likely to help us. So we do that naturally. We can also do it strategically in terms of the goals that we need to accomplish at work. Okay. So the other thing is relationship. So I mentioned earlier that I do a little inventory of the stakeholders in a change effort. And I look at, do I know this person? Do I know what they're about? Do I know what they care about? Do I, ever see them, which, used to be a little easier when we were not all remote. It's a little easier to kind of engineer chance encounters when you're in person than it is when we're all remote. But there are ways you can figure out how to meet people, how to be invited to certain things. I often do what I call a role empathy map, which is thoroughly informed by the user empathy map. and I'll send you a copy of this, so don't worry about not being able to read it. But I just look at, what is their position? What are they responsible for? What are their goals? What do they care about? What are they rewarded for, if I can discern that? And I can often come up with a hypothesis about it, even if I don't know exactly what they're going to be rewarded for formally in the organization. What are they hoping to accomplish in their role, in their part in the organization? And then, what are their concerns? What are their fears? What's exciting to them about their work? So I can get at least a decent hypothesis about what is going on for other people who I may not know well yet. And I consider them all potential allies, right? And I try then to think about, once I know what is their concern, what they're rewarded for, I try to think about how to frame whatever my request is in terms that matter to them. And I try to think about what currencies might matter to them. So not what I care about necessarily, but how can I frame it in a way that maps to their world? Now, again, I'm not trying to be manipulative, and I'm not trying to spin something. It has to be genuinely true, right? And if there is no mutual purpose, then, perhaps an exchange will gain some favorability. But I try to find mutual purpose first. So, I'm looking back at the comments, and my intent, Joe says, my intent is to freely offer many of these currencies without the expectation of exchange. Yeah, we all do that, right? We offer this without the expectation, but at some point, you may need some support. And if you have been freely offering these, you are more likely to get that support, right? So that's a good point about that. Okay, so don't be skeezy, right? I think it's easy for people to think about influence as being a little unsavory, and it doesn't have to be. As long as you're genuine, and as long as you actually do have some care for the other person and some interest for the other person, and you're looking at achieving organizational goals. I think when it gets skeezy is when you're the one who always asks for stuff but never returns favors, or when you ask for things and you're not upfront with what your motivation is, or when you only do favors for people with higher status and more power in the organization. That's when people start looking really skeezy. So don't be like that. And I can't imagine that any of you are like that. So expand your influence. Remember that it's a natural, normal human process. It's built on relationships. It's built on reciprocity. And you will be able to expand your influence. Okay. Oh, skeezy. I like the word skeezy, but yeah, it's true. Not everybody knows the word skeezy. It's a combination of skeevy and sleazy, I think. But it's I can't think of an example of someone who's skeezy, but anyway, I'm sure you all have met skeezy people. Don't be like them. Okay, so I think it's time for questions. So if at this point you would use the Q&A box, that enables me to keep track of the questions and also to go back to them. I almost always answer a question in the follow-up, and also to think about what would be useful for another webinar. So who has a question? No questions. Huh. Okay, Joe. Curious to hear about the similarities and differences between influence and power. Uh, I think that if you have positional power and authority in an organization, you have access to some of these currencies that other people may not. Um, Formal rewards and recognition, um, um, helping people with budget, helping people with equipment, that sort of thing. So you may have access to some of these types of influence if you have positional authority. Um, I think people have talked about network and referent power obliquely in the chat, where, you know, if you know a lot of people, you can introduce a lot of people, which is a form of power, but you can also use it as a way of influencing people. So I think there's some overlap. I think if you are, I mean, semantically, I suppose you could say coercion is influencing somebody to do something, right? But morally, I think it's quite different. I think it's quite different than reciprocity, because if it's coercion, there's no reciprocity, right? And there's the relationship is one of, just extraction. So there's some overlap, and your positional power within the organization, your referent power, or your network power your information power may expand your influence. So if you're interested in sources of power, I did a podcast on sources of power, power with, power over, a couple months ago. So you might want to check that out. What currencies would one use with people we may not get along with or can't find a mutual purpose or exchange with? I'd work first on trying to get along with them. I'd try empathy. I would try an empathy map to see what is going on for them. I might try reframing so that I gave myself a more positive frame with them. So that's where I would start. Right. And then, you may be able to find some things that they value that you have access to, because you always have to think about their currencies. But I would start by trying to build a better relationship. How often this empathy role map, how often does the empathy map need to be done? People change their thinking and feeling. In an organizational context, people are shaped by the role they're in, right? So I'm talking about from a professional standpoint in an organization, because people do change what they think and feel, but their role will have an influence on how they're rewarded, what is important for them to accomplish in the organization. So, I may do it, and then if I learn more about someone, I may update it. If they move to a new role, some things are going to remain the same, but other things are going to change with the role. Some of the research on influence says that personality has less to do with it than role. So, would you look for particular people in the organization to build your influence intentionally rather than let serendipity govern it? I think that if you want to get things done in organizations, it behooves you to understand who the stakeholders are and build relationships with them. So often I will meet people through serendipity, and just by being a human, build some at least thread of a relationship. It may turn out later that they need something that I can help them with. That's great. But I also try to think strategically about it when I am trying to to accomplish something in an organization. And this is something that I really balked at when I was newer in my career, because I felt like, relationships should just be pure, right? They should just be based on friendship, compatibility, shared interests, shared values, those sorts of things. And I think over the years, I have broadened my definition, and I have changed my, kind of how I think about those relationships. And I'm friends with a lot more people now because of that. So, there were people that I may have originally regarded as a stakeholder that I've gotten to be friends with. So, yeah, be strategic about it. How do people without authority influence? Well, all of us are working without authority in some sense, right? There are people we don't have the authority to tell them what to do, and the idea of exchange implies in some ways, except for things tied to management, that you don't have the authority. You do not have to have authority to listen to people, to share information with them, to share introductions with them, to do all of those things. Those can all be freely given without any positional power. How do you get accountability and ownership from people instead of just influence and instructions? I'm not sure I understand your question, Raphael. I think you get ownership when people feel like, they care about the project, or they care about you. So if you're giving people an opportunity to participate in something that's exciting, you'll get ownership. I don't necessarily expect accountability and influence. I think that's, that implies a level of formality that often isn't there. If someone says they're going to do something and they don't, I may, call them up and have a conversation, but I don't think about it in terms of accountability. And if they do that, they've lost a little reciprocity from me, right? If they say they're going to help me out with something and then they don't, that damaged the reciprocity and the relationship. And that's often as far as it goes. Is it a good idea to use role empathy map as a reference for one-on-ones, a first-time manager, or just a manager in general? I'm just curious about the general use cases that you'd use this. That's an interesting question. I was a guest appearance at my the university where I did my master's in a change class there, and one of the students, who we did some work on influence, chose to do it about her direct reports. She did not use the empathy map for stakeholders because she didn't have something going on right at that moment where change was important. But she did try to get empathy and use that kind of structured way to look at empathy for the people who reported to her. So she felt she gained some real insights from that. So that seems like a useful thing to do sometimes. Are there some currencies that are more impactful than others? That depends on the person. So not everybody's going to value the same things you do, right? So you have to be sure to think about what currencies matter to them, not just what currencies matter to you. But it's very individual. It's very individual in that. How can we be sure that we aren't, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, influencing and not slipping into coercion or enforcement? Be aware of your relative power. Be aware of your relative power compared to the other person, because if you have significant organizational power and you ask for a favor, it may be perceived as coercion, right? So if you're a manager and you're asking for something from a junior programmer, that may not feel like it's an actual reciprocal exchange. It may feel like a demand. So be really careful about that. Is there something like a constructive, destructive influence? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Going hardball is destructive. Saying do this or else, while something bad will happen to you. That's a form of, coercion, and that sort of hardball influence can really be destructive. So I tend not to go there. But yeah, when you use it manipulatively, when you aren't genuine about finding mutual purpose, when you're trying to spin somebody, those are all super destructive. Yes, and as Gitta says, when you're very strong, you have to be very nice. Okay, so I think I made it through all of the questions. Yes. Oh, that's Pippi Longstocking that says that when you're very strong, you have to be very nice. Okay, we made it through all the questions. So now I want to go back to the wrong thing. I went back to the wrong thing. I want to go back here. And let you know about what's coming up. So the next webinar is June 29th, which is getting unstuck. So if you haven't registered for that and you ever get stuck, which all of us do, you might want to sign up for that. I also want to let you know that I'm relaunching my online courses. I'm moving to a different platform, and I'm going to be, redoing the videos, changing things around, maybe, bundling them in different ways. So if you are interested in participating in one of those courses, check the links and sign up to show your interest, and I'll let you know when I open them for registration. I'm moving more towards a model where it's going to be open for a period of time, a couple times a year, three, maybe 4 times a year. So we get people moving through at the same time, because that's just more generative for people who are participating in it rather than just being on your own. So I'm excited about that. I've learned a lot about making videos in the last period of time, so I'm looking forward to redoing all my videos. Check out my videos on YouTube. I have taken to YouTube. So I've made some videos related to topics that we've covered here, little shorts on those. So you may find those interesting. Check them out. And there is a new episode of Change by Attraction coming tomorrow. And I'm going to be talking about clarity, conditions, and exchanges. So look out for that latest webinar coming tomorrow. And what else? Any final questions? I think we have 3 minutes. Oh, here's a question. What advice would you give to someone who's a first-time manager as a way through which they can genuinely expand their influence and build their credibility, even though they may be a new manager? Well, I'd think about who am I dependent on for my success? And then I would get to know them, right? I think middle managers are in a tough position because structurally they are often in competition with each other because they're all looking up to the boss, for scarce resources. But I would try to forge those relationships, and I wouldn't start with, here's what I need from you. I would start with genuine interest, right? Ask them, to tell you about, what their role is, what their department does, all of those things, which as a new manager, you have a great opening to do that, right? So showing interest in people is a great way to start building your influence, right? Genuine interest counts for a lot. So I would look at, who do I need to depend on for success? And there's always a lot of people like that. There are very few of us who can be successful all on our own in an organizational context. How to influence when time is boxed. I don't understand that question. I'm confused by that question. When you don't have a lot of time, because relationships take time to build, you know, I may look at mutual, I may start with mutual purpose then. I may just try to find mutual purpose. Okay, any last questions before we tie the knot on another webinar? All right. Well, thank you so much. It's always, this is one of my favorite things to do every month because I get to, you know, clarify my thinking on something, and I get to share some stuff with people. And I love these little interactions that we have via the chat and via the questions. So this is one of the fun things I do every month. And thank you so much for showing up. Hope to see you in June. All right. Bye-bye.